A brittle crack shattered the white storm. A body writhed beneath the snow, cold as a blade. In the silent death throes of timberline, no one heard. No one came. No one. Except the lonely woman. With a trembling hand, she touched what the world had already turned away from. No salvation. No promises. Only the refusal to walk away. And when those eyes opened, in the throes of death, they chose her. Not to survive, but to seal a vow greater than existence itself. So what could make a wild creature abandon instinct and bow its head before a human? Join Gallop of Glory as we embark on an unforgettable journey, one that will forever change the way you see freedom. The story begins with the sky darkening into a heavy shade of gray. Heavy clouds sagged low, pressing the snow into the earth, burying every trail, every lingering trace of human memory under a silent, frozen weight. Clara Whitmore pulled the cabin door shut behind her. She tugged an old, worn sweater tighter around her frail shoulders and stepped slowly into the endless expanse of white. The wind hissed through the cracks, carrying with it a voiceless call from something waiting out there. Cold, silent, but impossible to ignore. For 15 years since Samuel's death, Clara had forgotten what it meant to hear another human voice. She remembered the winter afternoons, when Samuel would lift her onto the back of his chestnut horse, Ashwind, and laugh, his voice rough with affection. "Keep your back straight, Clara. Trust the horse the way you trust your own heart." His hands, warm as sunlight piercing through the cold, had once wrapped her in a world she never thought she would lose. But now, in the barren frost, all she had left was the memory of warmth and the hollow ache of its absence. On freezing nights, they had sat by the fire. Samuel taught her how to tend to an injured horse, how to press gently on a wound, how to bind with bare hands, how to whisper calming words into a panicked ear. Every touch, every instruction, imbued with infinite patience. Now, only the wind remained, wailing through the cabin's cracks, and the snow, swallowing all traces of the past. Clara trudged across the frozen yard. Her calloused hands gripped a battered axe, intent on gathering a few more logs before the snow buried everything. Her lips, chapped and trembling, pressed into a thin line against the cold. Each step etched a lonely signature into the snow, proof that she, at least for now, still existed. Then Clara froze, at the edge of the clearing, where the trail dissolved into the drifts. Something dark and heavy marred the flawless white. At first, she thought it might be a fallen branch, or worse, the frozen carcass of a bear cub. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Step by cautious step, she crept forward. The snow beneath her boots cracked with a brittle, heartbreaking sound, like tiny sobs tearing through the storm. And then she saw it. A horse, a wild Mustang, collapsed. Its deep chestnut coat shimmered faintly with frost. A silver streak along its shoulder, like a wound carved by a crescent moon. Blood seeped into the snow around its body. A slow surrender of life against the relentless cold. It was still breathing. Barely. Shallow, stuttering gasps. Clara let the axe fall from her hand. She dropped to her knees, feeling the cruel bite of snow through her heavy trousers. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched its ribcage. Beneath the frozen hide, she felt it. The faint, faltering drumbeat of a heart. A tiny ember flickering against the devouring storm. For a moment, Clara and the horse locked eyes. And in that instant, Something raw and bottomless punched through her chest. Samuel. The vision of her husband. Pale, breathless, wasting away on their bed. Surged back into her mind, vivid and unbearable. She remembered holding his hand. Feeling the warmth bleed out of him. Feeling the final tremors of life slip away. While she remained helpless. Mute against the inevitable. If I abandon this creature now, am I not abandoning Samuel all over again? A gust of frigid wind ripped through the yard, snapping Clara's sweater like a surrender flag in the barren waste. Her throat closed tight. Her eyes stung with frozen tears. She could not turn away. Not this time. In the desolate heart of Timberline, where freedom and surrender blurred into one, Clara made her choice. She would not let this soul die. She would stand and fight for it, as she once stood by Samuel in his final hours. Clara staggered upright, dragging behind her an old, thick blanket, a coil of fraying rope, a bundle of brittle hay, and a dented canteen still clutching the last warmth of her hearth. She knelt beside the horse, wrapped the blanket clumsily around its shivering body, and pressed her thin, work-worn hands to its chest, whispering a broken breath into the heavy, frozen dusk. The horse's frail exhalations mingled with Clara's, wisps of life curling into the dying light of the afternoon. Night fell hard over Timberline, sealing the world in ice. But inside Clara Whitmore, for the first time in years, a fire began to burn again. The Timberline blizzard spared no one. On the second day after Clara found Ember, at the end of the snow-choked path, Noah Edwards appeared. His pickup truck crawled and groaned, inching across roads no sane soul would dare to drive once winter had claimed the land. Clara stood before her cabin, her hands clasped for warmth, watching her old friend approach. "I got your message," Noah said, his voice low and grave. "And if it's as bad as you say, Clara, that horse won't make it through the night." Clara said nothing. She knew. But knowing did not mean agreeing. Noah looked at Ember, lying beneath the tattered blanket, breathing faintly. "We can put him down," he offered gently, as if discussing a broken fence or a dying tree. "I brought the medication." Clara shook her head. "There's still a spark left in him," she said quietly. "If I end it now, I'd be killing a soul, Noah." And then, the first nights descended. Outside, the storm howled like lost souls screaming into the dark. Inside the starving cabin, Clara sat beside Ember, gently breaking chunks of ice to find water. Her fingers bled from the cold. The skin cracked and raw. With every movement, she silently recalled Rusty, the first horse of her life. When she was a little girl, Clara had ridden Rusty across the sunlit hills of her father's ranch. Rusty had fallen during a winter just like this. But back then, Clara had been too young, too small to help. Not now. Not this time. She would not let Ember die alone. Each morning, Clara broke the ice atop the water barrel, drawing a few trembling scoops. The shards cut her hands like razors, blood mixing with the bitter chill. But she did not stop. When Ember first tried to rise, a sharp, splintering crack echoed through the cabin. His front hoof split open. Blood poured out, staining the snow red beneath him. Clara collapsed at his side, tearing a strip from her coat to bind the wound, working through trembling sobs, tears freezing to her cheeks before they could fall. That night, Timberline became her own personal hell. The wind shrieked through the cabin walls, Snuffing out the oil lamp, Clara wrapped herself in Ember, and every scrap of cloth she had left. Patched quilts, old burlap sacks, brittle strands of hay. There were moments she almost gave in. Moments when she knelt in the frozen dirt beside Ember, body racked with shivers, breath shallow and fleeting. In her fevered delirium, Clara saw herself standing on the old porch. And there was Samuel, reaching out to her. Clara. His voice, like the wind threading through endless fields. She wanted to surrender, to close her eyes, and follow Samuel into the dark. But when she turned, she saw Ashwind. She saw Rusty. And she saw the eyes of every horse that had ever trusted her. Creatures who once ran wild beneath a vast sky, just because she had called. And amidst them all, Ember. Those dark, battered eyes. Waiting. Not crying. Not begging. Simply trusting. Clara clenched her fists, forcing her trembling body upright. She pressed her hand against Ember's chest, feeling the faint, desperate rhythm of a heart still battling the storm. "We're not dying today," Clara whispered. "Not today." The days that followed wove despair and hope into a relentless spiral. Ember grew weaker, and yet, somehow, fiercer. There were mornings Clara woke, thinking she had lost him, only to see a thin, shuddering breath ripple through his ear. She fed him tiny tufts of hay, no larger than a child's handful. She told him stories of her youth, of spring days on the ranch, of Rusty, of Samuel, of golden afternoons that now lived only in aching memory. Once, during the worst blizzard yet, when the windows iced over and the cabin blurred into a frozen tomb, Clara slipped. She crashed hard onto the cabin floor, a sickening crack echoing from her ankle. Pain lanced up her body, sharp and consuming. But she did not allow herself to collapse. She dragged herself across the floor, inch by inch, until she reached Ember. She pressed her forehead to his, their breath mingling into one trembling cloud against the frozen air. "If we must die," she whispered, voice breaking, "at least we'll die together." Snow melted into tears. Tears froze into ice. And then, a miracle so small it almost escaped belief. A faint, trembling nudge. Ember's muzzle, pressing weakly against her hand. Not much, but real. That night, Clara did not sleep. She lay curled against Ember, feeling the slow, struggling draw of his breath. A silent vow between two battered souls. We will survive. And at dawn, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ember lifted his head. Only a few inches. But it was enough. Clara's heart exploded inside her chest. Outside, the snow still fell. But inside the battered walls of the cabin, something delicate and indestructible had begun to take root. The blizzard had not relented. But inside Clara's cabin, the storm was no longer master. It was the morning of the 5th day. The pale winter sun clawed weakly at the clouds, spilling a silvery sheen across the snow. Clara, wrapped in a patched shawl, watched Ember stir. At first, just a shift of his ear. Then, a twitch of his nose. And finally, slow, agonizing, he planted his trembling forelegs into the snow-packed earth. Clara's breath caught. Her hands pressed over her mouth. Ember struggled, his body shaking from exhaustion. His hind legs scrabbled, slipped. And then, by some stubborn miracle, he pushed himself upright. He stood. Barely. Wobbling. Bleeding still from the cracked hoof. But he stood. Tears blurred Clara's vision. She stepped forward instinctively, but stopped herself, letting Ember have this victory alone. Their eyes met. Across the thin veil of mist rising from their breaths. In his dark gaze, Clara saw no plea. No fear. No dependence. Only an ancient, wild endurance. A silent bond, forged not by command, but by choice. She nodded, as if acknowledging a sacred vow. No words passed between them. None were needed. The days blurred into a slow rhythm of healing. Clara cleaned Ember's wound with snowmelt, binding it carefully with strips of linen torn from her few precious clothes. She spoke to him as she worked. About Samuel. About Rusty. About summers long buried beneath the snow of time. At night, when the cabin walls moaned under the battering winds, Clara would sit near the hearth, reading aloud whatever scraps of old books she could find. Poetry, mostly. Forgotten tales of heroes and journeys. Ember would listen, head low, but eyes awake, as if absorbing not the words, but the spirit behind them. Hope, fragile and stubborn, grew between them, like a flame cupped against the wind. It was on the 7th morning when the world changed again. A low rumble stirred Clara from her half-sleep. Not the storm. Engines. She rose stiffly, peering through the frost-laced window. 2 trucks. Official insignias gleaming on their doors, Bureau of Land Management. Clara's stomach turned to lead. She opened the door just as 2 figures approached. A man and a woman, bundled against the cold. Their expressions masked in professional neutrality. "Mrs. Whitmore?" the man asked. Clara nodded. "I'm Officer James Reed. This is Wildlife Specialist Diane Torres. We're here about the Mustang." Behind her, Ember had risen, standing a few cautious feet away. The officer's eyes flicked to him, noting the healing wound. The way he stayed close to Clara without lead or halter. "By federal regulation," Reed said, pulling a clipboard from under his coat, "wild Mustangs are protected. Private citizens aren't allowed to harbor them. We'll need to take custody of the horse for assessment." Diane Torres added more gently, "We understand you helped save him. But now it's a matter of wildlife management." Clara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "I didn't harbor him," she said. "I didn't break him. He stayed because he chose to." The officers exchanged a look. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Reed said. "We have protocols." They moved past her, slowly approaching Ember. The Mustang's ears pinned back. His nostrils flared. Clara saw the tremor ripple through his stance. Not fear, but poised defiance. Ember took a single step closer to her, placing himself between the officers and Clara. It was a gesture more eloquent than any words. Torres hesitated. "He's bonded to her," she murmured. "Doesn't matter," Reed said tightly. "We follow the law." Clara's heart pounded. She thought of Samuel, of Rusty, of every creature that had trusted her, and every time she had let fear or rules dictate her choices. Not this time. Never again. She squared her shoulders. "You'll have to go through me first," Clara said quietly. Reed's mouth tightened. "Ma'am, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Clara's voice rose. Not in volume, but an unbreakable conviction. You can take your papers, your trucks, your rules made from offices far from this place. She pointed to Ember. But you will not take his choice. Not while I draw breath. For a long moment. Only the wind answered. Then Reed sighed, signaling Torres to step back. We'll have to report this, he said. You do what you must, Clara answered. The officers returned to their trucks, engines grinding as they disappeared down the snowy road. Clara stood there long after they left, the cold biting her skin. Ember nickered softly and pressed his muzzle against her hand. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, Clara Whitmore felt something stronger than fear. She felt faith. Faith in a bond that neither law nor logic could sever. A covenant of fire and ice. A promise made not with words, but with hearts still beating stubbornly against the storm. And Clara knew, whatever came next, she would stand. Not just for Ember, but for everything wild and beautiful and free that had ever dared to trust a human heart. In the days that followed, Timberline remained cloaked in silence. But it was not the same silence. News, it seemed, had traveled faster than the storm. By the third morning after the BLM officers left, Clara noticed a black SUV idling at the far edge of her property. It didn't approach. It didn't leave. Just watched. The next day, tire tracks crisscrossed the fresh snow leading up to her cabin. Then came the letters. Folded sheets slipped into the crack of her door. No postage. No names. Some were sympathetic. Brief, heartfelt thanks from strangers who spoke of freedom, of courage. Others were not. You're playing God. One note read, in a cramped, angry hand. Wild means wild. The law is the law. Another said, you're making it harder for all of us. Clara read them all. She burned none. They became part of the weight she carried. Just like the snow pressing down on the roof. Just like the thin scar stretching across Ember's shoulder. Some evenings, Ember would stand outside the cabin, his silhouette a shadow against the frozen dusk. And Clara would sit on the porch, watching him, neither calling nor commanding, simply sharing the same small corner of a vast and different world. The pressure grew. Torres returned once, alone, her parka dusted with frost. She didn't bring backup. No clipboard this time. Only a thermos of coffee, which she offered wordlessly to Clara. They sat in brittle silence, until Torres finally spoke. They're not going to let it go. Clara nodded. She had known this. They might come with warrants next time. Torres continued, with tranquilizer darts, with force. Ember, sensing the tension, stepped closer to Clara's chair, his breath misting over her shoulder. Torres watched the movement, her mouth tightening. You could fight in court, she said, but it's a long road. And even if you win, it might break him. Clara looked out across the snowfields. He chose, she said simply. And so did I. Torres sighed, finishing her coffee. She left the thermos behind. As she walked back to her vehicle, she paused at the edge of the yard. They don't understand, she called over her shoulder. But I do. Then she was gone. The night after Torres' visit, Clara sat by the hearth, watching the flames dance. Memories stirred like ashes. Samuel's voice, warm and rough, teaching her how to saddle Rusty for the first time. The stubborn way Rusty had refused to be broken by any hand but hers. The feel of Ashwin's breath against her ear on the morning Samuel died. The stallion nuzzling her shoulder, as if to say, "You're not alone." And now, Ember, a living echo of every bond she had ever dared to trust. Clara rose, her knees protesting, and crossed to the table where the letters lay. She sorted them into two piles, one for hope, one for fear. Then she fed the second pile to the fire. Fear had no place here. Not anymore. At dawn, Clara saddled Ashwin's old bridle over her shoulder. Not to claim Ember, but to stand with him. She stepped into the cold, her breath billowing in clouds. Ember stood waiting, as if he had known. Side by side, woman and horse faced the horizon. The world remained wide, and wild, and cruel. But in that moment, Clara understood. Freedom was not something given. It was something claimed. Fiercely, and without apology. And together. Against the laws. Against the storms. Against the slow grinding wheels of systems that did not understand the fire in either of their hearts. They would claim it. One step. One breath. One heartbeat at a time. The covenant was sealed. Not in ink. Not in law. But in trust. And Timberline, for the first time in a long, long while, sang not of loneliness, but of defiance, and the quiet, stubborn miracle of survival. The storm came back with a vengeance. Timberline disappeared under a white fury, a blind rage of snow and screaming winds. Inside the cabin, Clara huddled near the hearth, coughing so hard she thought her lungs might tear apart. She had barely slept for days. Fever burned behind her eyes. Every breath scraped raw against her ribs. Even the firewood was running low. The blizzard clawed at the cabin walls, rattling the windows, seeping cold through every crack. Clara tried to stand, to gather another armload of logs. But her knees buckled. She collapsed against the floorboards, wheezing, her vision swimming. A shadow loomed in the corner of her eye. Ember. He stood close, watching, tense. Clara lifted a trembling hand toward him, but the strength fled her fingers. "I'm sorry," she rasped. "I can't." The world tilted and spun. Darkness surged up to claim her.